Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be back, continuing my You Are the Planet series for astrology as a living meditation. My name is Tara All, and you can find me at taraall.com, which is TARAAAL.com. And I just wanted to say, so many of you have left wonderful comments and questions on my other videos, and I'm not always super awesome. Actually, I'm probably pretty lazy when it comes to checking those comments, but if you email me through my website under the contact page, I'm really good at responding to those. So if you want to reach me, please use that avenue, and I'll be delighted to hear from you, whatever you may have. So today I am moving into Mars. This is You Are Mars. Today is my Mars return, exact today. So I figured I wouldn't waste the opportunity to talk about Mars while I'm totally in the Mars zone. And for those of you who aren't familiar with my planets on the first work, you can find out all about that on my website, or with the EA Zoom meetings. I have a number of different videos about planets first. But living planets first has been something I have been doing now for 4 years. I'm going into my 5th year of it, and it's a way of, for me, having a more experiential relationship with astrology. So essentially, there is a technique with the chart, but we won't worry about that now at all, because you actually don't need that to do this. Really, this is about choosing a planet that you really want to embody first. And it's like, if you imagine all the different parts of yourself that you've got going on inside, you know, we all have our inner parent, our inner child, our adventurous self, our responsible self, whatever you have, those are for you. Planets to me are that way. Planets to me are an external or as above representation of the facets of our psyche on the inside. So you've got it all in there, but if you want to really see and live life through one of those more than the other, living planets first is an awesome way to do that. It's also an awesome way to just channel your own information around planets, right? And especially if you're working with astrology, you know, I'm like most people, right? We learn from teachers, we read books, we go to conferences and workshops and all these things. And so when we learn all of this information about astrology, which is amazing, and I continue doing it, I always will be doing it. But there's something special about coming into your own as far as developing your own relationship. And so what I've been excited about is to really dig in and say, okay, so I've learned all these things about Mars. How does Mars show up just for me? And that takes some exploration. So that's what this series is about. I think this is my 4th one. I've done You Are the Moon, You Are Mercury, You Are Venus. So we're up to You Are Mars. And as I was saying, I am in my Mars return, and this has been, the last week has been amazingly Mars-like. Like, do you know there's just so many things that you just can't make up, right? Like you couldn't plan it or make it up better. So last week, literally just days before my Mars return, I was fully, my character, who I am and how I am as a leader, was fully attacked at work. You know, like someone has actually filed complaints about me, and that's not easy for me, and but something juicy for me to work with. So at the same time as I was going through my own reactions and my own defense mechanisms, and then my offense that comes out from there, I was thinking, wow, it's like, how freaking amazing that this, you know, at my Mars return, that I'm actually being confronted with a fight. It gives me an opportunity. And or to be with that energy for me, which is really what Planets First is. So I feel like in some ways I've chosen to go through this Planets First journey myself. Sharing it is really just, a second step. It's doing it that really is what it is for me. Then when life gives me these experiences, I've asked for it. I've asked to see it, to be aware of it, to be in the moment of it. So, here I go with Mars. And so for me with Mars, let's just say this, like, for example, if you're thinking about choosing a planet first, or you're wondering, like, what's up with my Mars energy? If you've been feeling lack of energy, right? Mars rules energy. So if you've been feeling a lack of energy, lack of assertion, if you feel like it's tough for you to initiate things, especially to initiate going after what you want, because Mars is about our authentic desire, what we want to go after, what is worth fighting for, right? So if you've been having a tough time with going after those things, having a hard time taking your turn, right? Really stepping up and saying, okay, this is my chance and I'm going to go for it. Mars is a really empowering planet to choose first, because it gets us that fiery igniter of going after things. It turns it back on, right? Mars turns the fight instinct back on. And the aim of Mars is not to be fighting off life, right? That's shadow side of Mars. And for people with strong Mars, and I will use myself as an example, it is the best example I've got, as I know it the best, and it's me, is I have Aries rising, so Mars rules my chart. And fighting off life has been my go-to, right? To find things externally and constantly have a sword up in my hand, ready to fight it off. And whether it has been seen or not, I have calmed that down, as I've gotten older and into my 40s, into my mid 40s now. It's funny, like some of the first real, I would say, softening has been happening for me. But I did for a long, long time, and still, when shit hits the fan, still have a tendency to kind of pull out that Martian standpoint of, I'm ready to fight, ready to take it on, taking everything as a challenge, right? So that's not the type of fight that I'm talking about bringing out with a healthy Mars first, but I'm talking about the fight in us, the fight to want to live, right? The fight to want to be in this game of life, to be going after a purpose that matters to us, right? It is the part of us that has a purpose to serve, right? And if that has been squashed, pushed aside, like it's normal in life, right? So we have families, we have jobs, we have all these things going on. And so this like initial impulse to like do me gets kind of pushed aside, because there doesn't seem to be time to do as much me, right? And at our jobs, oftentimes, depending on what we do, someone else is telling us what we need to do. So that's not a full, that doesn't always fulfill the Martian desire to go do my own thing. And then certainly our kids and our partners and our parents and our friends and all these people need these different things, need us to do more of the Venus thing or the Moon thing or maybe the Saturn thing, right? So Mars is about doing my thing. But it's interesting because I realize that I sometimes get, with Mars being linked up with authentic desire, I tend to take Mars really personal. And it is a personal planet. But I was having a great conversation with my friend and fellow astrologer, Ashwin Balaji, this morning. He's the founder of Celestial Vibes podcast and magazine and community. He does some amazing stuff. And he and I do work together. But he is in India, and his foundation is Vedic Astrology. So when we come together, we're kind of synthesizing and sharing and bringing different ideas from the different schools of astrology, if you will. And he was saying to me this morning, he's like, Mars is not that personal. He's like, Mars is actually what is serving, a greater purpose. And it's absolutely true. And it does that by honoring its own energy and the way its own energy needs to express. So I realized that for me, I was like, ooh, and it's funny, he reminded me too, he's like, okay, the Moon is most personal, right? It's the closest to Earth. He's like, Mercury is super personal, Venus is super personal, but Mars is getting out there a little further. And it gave me a little pause to think about Mars. And you know, I think it's Howard Sesportis and Liz Green that talk about Mars being a henchman to the sun, and sun representing our sense of purpose, right, or our hero's journey in this lifetime. And if Mars, you know, Mars is meant to serve that purpose, Mars is about something greater. And this is not to say that Venus and Mercury and Moon are not about something greater. But when we take them kind of from a personal standpoint inside, yes, Mars wants a mission. And that mission does need to include more than just personal satisfaction, right? And I think that that's a happy reminder to me today about Mars, and a reminder about my own Mars, right? But I do believe that we best serve life by first best serving ourselves. And a big part of that comes from allowing ourselves the space to be who we are. And Mars is like the flame that does that. Think about how, you know, Mars is a glyph, right? The circle with the arrow coming out of the glyph. The circle is the everything, right? Or maybe even think about the circle as the cosmic womb, the circle of spirit. But Mars is pushing out of the circle. Mars wants out of the containment. Mars wants out of the flow. So there's a certain amount of disruptive energy to Mars. You know, it's yang energy. It's meant to shatter and break apart things. It's not meant to keep things the same. It's meant to push away to find its own path. But its own path serves a greater purpose. But that greater purpose, you know, it's very difficult to get on that path if one's own path isn't first honored. And essentially they're the same thing. But what I'm going for here is that with Mars, it's important to choose yourself, to self-actualize first. Not at the expense of someone else or something else, but to remember that your life, the very fact of you existing is your permission to be you, right? Mars is ruler of Aries, which is birth. The moment we come out of a shared situation, right? A dependency on mom, to coming out into the world. Now, there's still interdependency and always will be, but I'm saying it signifies for the first time that I'm not tethered by a cord to someone. You know, I can take a breath on my own. And so at every moment when you're working with Mars energy, there's a piece to that. You know, am I able to go my own way? Am I able to follow my own impulse? Am I able to initiate what I want and what is important for me and what is purposeful for me? You know, if you've spent too much of your lifetime serving everyone else's purposes or needs, that Mars is like a teenager that just got suppressed. And through that suppression, you know, eventually that Mars is going to come back out again. So for most of us, I'm a good example with my current situation, right? Mars return happens, or transits happen involving Mars, or progressions, whatever it is that lights up that energy in you and will remind you how well you've gone through that separation process. And by that separation, I mean of individuating into your own self, you know, to bringing out your inner warrior and standing up for yourself, standing up for who you are. Not in a stab someone in the face kind of way or an overly aggressive way, but in a solid standing, here I am doing me. And I don't need to rely on someone else or feed into someone else's needs or patterns. I can do me, right? So to such an extent, Mars is, I'm doing me. And then the deeper question becomes, what does it really mean to do me? And how does doing me really serve humanity, serve the world, serve the cosmos, whatever your belief is around that. Okay. So another thing about Mars is interesting is, Mars definitely is a warrior. And so we're dealing with the fight when we've got some level of fighting when it comes to Mars. Mars is also how you give it to someone. So I think about Venus is your automatic or instinctual defense mechanisms along with the moon, right? But Mars is more your offense, If you're going to go after something or someone, Mars will show how you do it. Mars will show your particular weapon of choice, right? But before I get into weapons a little bit more, I want to talk about honor. Because with Mars, even when Mars is fully going for it, fists pounding, right in the middle of the ring, Mars naturally adheres to a code of honor. Meaning, Mars is not about stabbing in the back. Mars is not about manipulating and doing things that are unseen. Mars energy is about confronting face-to-face, head-on, and having a fair fight. So, for example, let's use the signs Aries and Scorpio to look at this difference, right? So, Aries, ruled by Mars, is actually not good at paying attention to potential manipulation. Aries isn't good about turning around and noticing what's behind. It's really focused on the front. And it, on some levels, expects the other person or the opponent to also adhere to the same code of honor. When you get into Scorpio realm, all bets and all rules are off. It'll go for the kill shot. And you won't necessarily know it's coming. So one of the things about being careful with Mars energy is you get all worked up to get in a fight, right? The warrior self comes out and, you just need to prove yourself and stand your point, and, anger's building or frustration's building, whatever, irritation's building. These are all great Mars words. And then all of a sudden, you shoot off at the mouth, or you punch someone in the face, or you, whatever your go-to is. But then all of a sudden, things all get twisted up, and the other person takes it to a whole new level, or they totally do something behind your back, or they accuse you of something that you didn't do, and you wonder what just happened, right? That could be a pitfall of Mars. Mars gets all amped up, but doesn't always see the full situation, especially the more hidden things. So with potential weapons, and one way you can know, one thing I play around with planets first, or planets in general, I kind of like to play around with the idea of, okay, so when do I know when a certain planet is showing up? So we can choose planets first. We also can observe when planets first are just happening, okay? So my current situation at work, one of the things that was showing up when this particular situation with all this hostility is a big rising of anger, right? So in that respect, you can say Mars is a big part of coming forward first in that equation, right? It wasn't Venus first, which would be, let's work it out, let's talk about it, can we compromise, right? It was much more the, you are this way, you do this, and I hate it, right? Which is a much more Martian-driven thing. So if you know the sign that your Mars is in, which you probably do if you're watching this video, but if you also know what Mars sign your friends or family are in, you can be on the lookout for when Mars is rising up, right? So as far as weapons go, Mars in Aries is a classic one. It's easy to, Aries is oftentimes easy because it's just forthright, straightforward, right? It doesn't beat around the bush. You know, a Mars in Aries, big part of the weapons is going to be physical force. So, you know, it could be full on tackling you, could be punching you, could be competing with you. You know, is another example of a weapon. But physical force really is a big one for Aries. Although, in general, Aries, they bluff as much as they jump in the ring. So that's another piece of it too. You know, oftentimes Aries and Mars in general, you know, will talk a big game, big tough game, but when it comes down to it, will oftentimes run away when really pushed, right? Because sometimes there's a lot of bravado involved with Mars. Again, it's not the deep, more what I would call Pluto or Scorpionic desire to really take someone down, you know, like in a deep, dark way. So, you know, those are two different energies to play around with in these situations. But in general, Mars is not going deep, dark, and dirty. You know, Mars is just getting riled up and honestly just kind of wanting a good fight. And part of Mars thrives on adrenaline. So competition is exciting. You know, it turns us on, keeps us alive. It even turns on sexual energy, right? So it can be, you know, an aphrodisiac in that way of like, ooh, you know, I'm getting excited. It's a physical response that can feel good. But let's move to Mars and Taurus. So the weapons around Mars and Taurus, and we take a big turn here. We go from Yang Aries to Yin Taurus, and an earth sign. So a big part of the weapons that Taurus oftentimes will use, like money and resources and things. You know, it's really easy when you're angry to cut off a supply of things. You know, to stop contributing to something, to not provide material things that have been provided before. You know, it's almost like the weapon is to starve you on some level materially. Can certainly be it. One of them, right? There's so many different directions this can take. So my intention is only just to give a couple to be thinking about it. But you can notice, like, if a Mars and Aries person is really getting pushed and you can see their physical body, like, you know, if their face is turning red and their hands are clenching, you can be pretty sure that Mars is leading the show there. And so depending on how you want the situation to go, you can find a way to meet that Mars, you know, or you can find the perfect counterpart to find a balance, you know, where that tension can be relieved. So that's really what I'm going for with this, you know, to be able to keep your eye out for those things with others and with yourself. Because if you know your own Mars energy, when you start to get angry and those things start to happen, you can start to recognize and step back and a little bit more objectively be like, oh, okay, my Mars is really getting triggered. What are some things I can do to either calm that down? Sometimes just calling it out is all you need to do. You know, oh, there goes my Mars. I don't have to keep going down this road if I don't want to. You know, awareness is probably the most powerful thing that we have. That way it's not operating underneath the surface, you know. It's not operating in the shadow. It's operating in the light, and we have better chances of it not running amok and not running down the destructive way. So Mars in Gemini, well, we all know that Gemini is wonderful at fighting with words, right? Words are weapons. So using information against you could be gossip, could just be outsmarting you with words, you know, tripping you up in your words, or talking and using so many words, right, that you don't have a chance to even like get anything in edgewise, is an example of the Gemini energy when it comes to Mars. Mars and Gemini also just can be straight angry words. You know, anything that Mars comes in contact with is kind of like a little power pack. I think about it that way, you know, so it adds like extra battery power, if you will, or sometimes I use the words like Mars me up, because there's just like, ooh, you know, shoot me up with this extra power, right? So anything Mars is touching, including planets Mars is an aspect to, the sign that Mars is in, the house that Mars is in, you can think about like extra an extra current of juice running there, right? It's going to run a little hotter and it's going to run a little faster than other things. And when things run hot and fast, like think about in the body, right? So Mars rules like eruptions, so boils, rashes, acne, right? Things that are red and erupt. So kind of think about that energy. If it goes on too much, it erupts and erupts and erupts and erupts, and that's can happen with anything that Mars touches. So and especially if we've had a tendency to not allow our Mars to have a healthy, spontaneous expression, which oftentimes, because society in many ways, at least in the United States, and at least through my generation, there was still an emphasis on, there's certain ways that you shouldn't act. You should keep your cool. You should keep your shit together. And maybe even you shouldn't be so selfish going after, what you want, or think about parents always saying, be nice to your brother, be nice to your friend, be nice to whatever. And I'm not saying that I support, not being nice, but you get told to be nice too many times, and that gets all turned up inside, and that makes a crazy party waiting to come out at some different moment. That moment when all of a sudden, the 50 years of being nice, all of a sudden, you come out of that space and say, all of that tension of all those 50 years blows up all at once on one person who just cut in line in front of you, right? This is why letting Mars have healthy expression is so important. So moving on to Mars in Cancer, as far as weapons go, can be belonging. This is the classic situation in the family where someone is disowned, right? You're no longer part of the family. You no longer belong. You no longer have a home here. You have to go find your own place, or I'm not going to take care of you anymore. Also emotionally, Cancer is amazingly passive aggressive when it comes to using emotion as a weapon. Either over flooding with emotion in a way that it drowns somebody, or completely cutting emotion off. It's like, let's say maybe you have had this close relationship with someone all, for the last 2 years, and then they say something that you don't like. The Mars and Cancer person, probably any type of Cancer person, and the tendency is just to shut right down, go right back in that shell, and you're cut off. You're no longer part of this flow. Mars and Leo has a lot to do with attention, right? So I think about Mars and Leo. You piss off a Mars and Leo, and it's like a little kid. You're not invited to my party. You can't play with me. You can't share my toys, which is a big part of it, because with Leo, the way Leo in so many ways shows love and affection is by inviting other people into that space, come do these special things with me, be part of my special adventures, let's make special things together, whatever that looks like. So, you make that proud Leo upset, and they will withdraw all their attention from you, because they know, at least for them, that nothing's worse than being ignored. Now, Mars to Virgo. Sometimes the weapon is just cranky criticism. It can also be the martyr. That's one weapon that oftentimes Virgo will pull out. I've done, all these things for you. I always take care of all of these things. But oftentimes I feel like it's just this kind of ripping apart. Mars and Virgo, there's just a lot of heat and energy behind ripping apart, ripping things apart, really. Ripping them apart and pointing out all the flaws. This is wrong. This is wrong. This isn't right. You didn't do this right. This whole flood of criticism that you know, makes you just want to take the next ticket to some far off place and just get outside of like the cranky zone. And then Mars into Libra. The weapon, you know, and it can be different things here, but one of them can be, it includes social type things. So sometimes this is somehow making you look bad socially, but not doing it so that it's obvious. You know, it's almost like being nice to your face, but behind your back, making sure that you are not connected or have the liaisons that maybe you thought that you did, right? Because part of this, the Libra, one thing that Libra and Cancer share in common is they both tend to be passive aggressive. So whereas Libra oftentimes will come across being somewhat nice to your face, but underneath will be doing things to make sure perhaps that you know, you don't have the same standing that you did before. Can be one way with Libra. Or even with friendships, right? Or relationships, you know, somehow, you know, maybe it is that you sway, you know, the whole group of friends, you know, away from that person who has done you wrong, or you somehow find your way into making relationships with that friends that that person has. You know, you make relationships with those people and sway them your direction, right? Kind of leaving that person out when it comes to the social circle is what I'm going after here. One way that it can be. Now, I've also found like one thing for me that I've experienced with Libra is oftentimes it just, because Libra doesn't like dealing with things that are ugly or unpleasant, sometimes it is just a complete break, you know, like you're just dropped from the list. It's easier to deal with than to kind of work around in the muddy muck, which brings us next to Scorpio, because Mars in Scorpio likes poking around in the dirt or the shit of it, being that, you know, it actually rules elimination and things that need to be gotten rid of. But Mars and Scorpio, as far as weapons go, you know, you just have to watch out because you don't know. It can be manipulative, it can be controlling, it can be abuse of power. You know, there's a whole list of things that can happen. But the thing about Scorpio is Scorpio plays for keeps, and Scorpio gets to the bottom line. So if you've had an incident with a Scorpio and you've really pushed their buttons, you should be careful. And we should all be careful because we don't want to push anybody's buttons that far. But I'm using extremes as, you know, an example, just because Scorpio knows how to go for the kill shot. You know, they know where the weakness is, so they will find it and they will exploit it. They're good at that. It's what, you know, it's the counter side to what makes them such good, you know, detectives and good psychologists and good, you know, being able to root in and get into where those, you know, secret spaces are and, you know, finesse them out so that they can be dealt with. But in the same respect, the shadow side of that is, you know, using it in a less positive way. And because they have a good gut sense of what will really push someone to their edge, you know, it's a different game with Scorpio. Always a different game with Scorpio. And then with Sagittarius, it's, you know, in my experience with Mars and Sagittarius, and I am actually surrounded by them in my life, sometimes it's belittling, sometimes it's talking down to you, it's holding a lofty position of I know more than you, you know, and you're not even worth a conversation, can be part of it. Sagittarius also will use the truth as a weapon. So, you know, that's another piece. Scorpio will go root around to get, you know, to the truth. So, for example, let's just say, you know, I'm going to go back to Scorpio for a second, but like, let's just say that you tried to pull a nasty card on Scorpio. They would then go root around until they found a nastier card on you and expose that truth. So, but with Sagittarius, it's more of a weapon being You know, I actually know the truth and you don't, which to me on some level always translates to a bit of belittlement. You know, it could be just a little, because Sagittarius can, you know, think it knows everything. Sagittarius, though, also is prone to lying and exaggeration. So that can happen as well. You know, a weapon can be lies. In my learning, and every sign can lie. So I'm not saying that they don't or that they wouldn't, but Gemini and Sagittarius and Pisces are the ones most prone to lying. So as weapons, you know, we can see that. Gemini tends to be a changing of the mind more, like when it comes to lying. Sagittarius just, you know, from big to little, you know, to outrageous lies can happen. So that's something to notice. Sag is really getting pushed. You know, they might really start to make up a big story about something. And maybe if you know this about them, instead of immediately getting worked up about how they're telling a big story, maybe first tune in and think, wow, what's going on that pushed them to the point that they need to make up that big story? Because that's the thing with all of us, you know. If I'm emotionally cutting myself off or cutting you off, what's going on with me that got me to that place? If I'm suddenly withdrawing financial support from something that I've always supported before, the bigger question is what's going on underneath? What has pushed me to that place? What has gotten me to that place that I think I need to fight so fiercely, you know, that I'm going to go in and use whatever strength I think I have. Okay, let's keep going with this before I jump my brain on some other track. So Mars, Capricorn. What was that? Capricorn sometimes can just be, you know, think about a parental type experience. You push Capricorn and they have a tendency to, they can also, like Scorpio, pull a power trip, but it can more be, you know, my way or the highway. Truly acting like a parent, whether or not there's a child involved in the conversation, can be part of it. Capricorn also is good at I know it sounds very, I don't mean this to be, I'm going over the top just for understanding, not saying that these signs all do these things, but the energy, the possibility is there is what I'm saying. So Mars in Capricorn 1 can, if they get pushed far enough, because respect is so important to a Capricorn, if they feel disrespected, you know, they can ruin things for you. They can do what they can to ruin your reputation. They can do what they can to remove you, like if it's a work situation, remove you from your position, right? Because the whole idea of Capricorn in some respects is like, you know, you're fired. You know, you're fired, you're demoted, you're, you know, whatever that looks like. There's no room for negotiation. So the weapon in many times, you know, is control in that way. Control in the sense of coming from a higher position. The same way you think about, you know, a parent saying to a kid, you do what I say because I tell you so. There can be an element of that in there. And also, Capricorn is very much attached with judgment and shame. So other elements of weapons can be making you feel ashamed. Now, I want to clarify, no one can make you feel any way. But in this situation, you could find yourself reacting that way based on the things that they do. You know, passing judgment on you, judging you for what you do, being judgmental in general. These are definitely weapon choices of Capricorn. Ways to make you feel small, insignificant, disrespected. Yeah. And then we move to Aquarius, and Mars in Aquarius, it's interesting. Aquarius is a fixed sign. So even though we think about Aquarius as being very free-thinking and freedom-seeking and wanting to liberate and expand opportunities and progress society, when Aquarius has kind of got itself locked down into a certain belief or cause, there's not much room to move. So you can just translate that to a conflict situation, right? And if an Aquarius gets angry, one of the weapons can be alienation. You know, it can be ostracizing someone from the group, making the person feel alienated, shut out somehow. The other thing about Aquarius that seems to ring true most of the time is sarcasm in an unkind way. You know, there's a certain element of Aquarius that can be detached enough from emotion that it can say mean, harsh, sarcastic things in ways that a person can take as being devoid of any compassion, right? Devoid of any empathy. So this sort of almost like dehumanizing you can happen with Mars in Aquarius, right? There's sort of like a complete withdrawal from any personal connection to completely just observing you and not with a friendly eye. Mm-hmm. So finally, with Mars and Pisces, Pisces is the other sign I was speaking of that can have tendency towards lying, but the lies of Pisces tend to be lies of omission. So Pisces more avoids saying things, you know, or pretends that things didn't happen. So one strategy with a weapon with Pisces could be to completely ignore that something even happened that did. Another piece of Pisces and Virgo as polarities both have an element of the martyr in them. So that can be in there as well. But here's the weird thing about Pisces. For Pisces, and this makes sense because everything has to have its polarity point. Every quality, everything that we're dealing with. So if Pisces ultimately is connected with unconditional love and compassion, grace, forgiveness, there's a flip side to that. And that can come out as a weapon when it comes down to Pisces. Yeah. Pisces, it's even like, because I think oftentimes Pisces' first option probably would be to, you know, avoid the fight altogether. You know, Pisces for me in general is not an archetype. You know, it's passive in nature, the yin sign, and it's really, you know, one of its best gifts is being able to accept things, you know, as they are. So we don't see it as something that would generally be, you know, just jumping to fight at something. But like every sign, you know, it has all those expressions. So when Mars is in Pisces, I think one of the weapons is just to disappear, maybe from your life altogether. You know, that escapism tendency is just, I'm out of here. I'm checking out. And, you know, if it's something or someone that has been really important to you, you know, that can be just as effective of a weapon as something else. There also is the element of, you know, making up stories, right? Because there is a level of imagination and an delusion when it comes to Pisces. But I feel like that just disappearing is the one that's more likely to happen. So I think with this Mars in general, that I've covered most of the things that I want to cover with Mars. And let's move away from weapons for a minute, because I feel, you know, if we're doing super healthy Mars, there really isn't a need to fight. And what I mean by fight, there really is no need to defend oneself. Anytime that we are defensive, we're giving reason to the other person that there is something going on, or that we have something that we need to defend. And the healthiest position and the strongest position to be in is to be comfortable with who we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it. So, for example, none of us like it when someone comes at us with anger. None of us like it when we're accused of things, when someone, picks an argument with us, when someone, whatever the thing is, disagrees with us, doesn't like how we present ourselves, sometimes people just don't like the energy that we run on. Everybody doesn't have an affinity for each other. But if we are comfortable in our own skin around that, and we know that we're coming from an authentic place of genuinely who we are, and doing the best we can, then those accusations or those pokes and stabs and bumps and pushes, they're not as big of a deal because we're solid with ourselves. Where it becomes really tricky is when you're not solid with yourself and someone pokes at those things or accuses something. The problem really comes in that when you already question yourself. Because when you already question yourself and something external questions it, you're almost always forced to a defensive position. And that's because deep down inside, you're not solid. You're not solid in recognizing or believing that you're coming from a place of your own truth or your own strength, or even that simply you're a good person. If you question some of these things about yourself, you will attract situations in the outside world that will question them as well. And part of what is happening is the outside world is seeing what's going on inside of you. And so I am not saying, I'm a big believer in working with the mirror, but I also don't believe that everything we see in the mirror is the same version of who we are, right, on the inside. But there's generally some bit of truth there. So when you're triggered and you feel your defensiveness coming up and your Mars comes up and it wants to turn things over to the offense, because Mars doesn't like being pushed. Mars does not appreciate being pushed. Mars likes room to move and do its own thing freely on its own agenda. But the only way you really know where you're at with your Mars and how happy your Mars is, like how happy you are with your raw energy, how happy you are with your own code of honor. Like using myself for example. So someone can accuse me of something that's untrue. But if I don't believe that about myself, I don't need to defend it. That doesn't mean that I might not need to make a statement saying, no, that's not true, or do whatever needs to happen. But I don't need to get defensive about it because I can be solid in myself of where I'm at with that. That's my code of honor with me. And I think one of the biggest benefits of working with Mars is, Mars is associated with energy. So when you are working with Mars, you are choosing your own energy for yourself. Doesn't mean you're not going to share it with the world. But instead of just letting your energy run off wherever it runs off, instead of wasting it, instead of bottling it up, when you choose Mars first, you say, I'm choosing my energy. I'm choosing to work with my energy in the way that works for me. And so a big part of working with Mars is thinking about your energy. Where is it going? How do you use it? Do you tend to overspend it? Do you tend to hoard it inside? All of these things are going to have consequences. But energy, if you learn to work with it in the best way for you, keeps you healthy, keeps you bright and open to life. It clears away the fogginess that comes from energy being blocked and lets this free flow happen, it gives your body space to do what it needs to do. It loosens up, all like these, like the muscles that get all tight, the things on the inside that clamp down. When you choose Mars and like breathe and relax into like, this is my energy, how does it want to move? Lots of healing can happen. And then, honestly, lots of things can happen. So this idea of Mars having a purpose, it's really, really hard to go after that thing that is most important to you if you're too tired. If you haven't yet figured out your own rhythm of energy so that you know how to give yourself enough sleep, enough exercise. And if you haven't also learned to not fully go down, the rabbit hole when your anger gets triggered, or when your instincts, of fight, flight, freeze come on. Because if you live in that state all day long, every day, that will take all your energy. What I'm saying here is, so many of us use all of our energy to run our reactions. Like, all that energy runs into our reactions. So everything we're doing is reactive. But Mars is a proactive planet. It doesn't want to spend all of its time reacting to all the things coming at it. It wants to initiate a thing. So when you're getting triggered, when you're dealing with someone else's Mars weapon, when you're getting irritable, if you can stop and think, is this where I want to put my energy? And if you do, it is not a right or wrong thing, but it's a good chance or opportunity in those moments when, if you can really feel how much of your energy it's taking to continue perpetuating your anger, irritation, your frustration, when you hear yourself reworking it, calling up 3 friends, complaining about it, you can't sleep because it's running through your head, your muscles are getting tight, you're getting a migraine, all these things are happening, right? You are literally using all of your energy to run that reaction. And not just to run it, like, you're perpetuating it. You're making it keep going. You're on the hamster wheel of it. And when you do that, all that energy that could be spent on starting up that new thing you really want to do, or digging back into something you started and didn't finish, doing something that really does bring you, joy or excitement, you could be using the energy that way. But here's the thing I would say to all of us out there who have a tendency to be adrenaline junkies and tend to like to have some sort of problem to be dealing with. Somewhere underneath that, we are using that to suck our energy so we don't do something else. And the something else is probably a little scary, a little risky, but it's where the soul is meant to go. But the ego self gets uncomfortable. And so then we create these circumstances where we know we can control it because we're going to suck enough energy that we can't do that other thing, that important thing. And ultimately, Mars wants to serve that important thing. So I'm encouraging myself in Mars first stuff and Mars all life stuff, not to give our energy away down the garbage dump. It's a waste. It's not that it's bad, but it takes away from something that's super awesome. So in those moments, think about whether that's where you really want to put the energy. Most of us aren't going to stop an initial reaction to something. But most of us and especially all you watching this video, you know what it's like in that moment when all of a sudden you're like, my buttons were pushed, I am freaking angry, and you sit in that, and it keeps on going, and you realize pretty quickly that you are the one feeding it. You're feeding the monster. So then you can ask yourself, do I want to keep feeding this monster? Do I really want to keep feeding this monster? Or do I want to move on to something different? Do I want to give that energy somewhere else? Because the truth is, as much as you may complain that you don't like that thing that you're putting your energy into, by the fact of you continuing to put energy into it, you are absolutely choosing it. So if you want to choose something different, drop it. Drop it. It's not easy to drop those habits, and it's not easy to let go of our pride and our attachment to needing to prove something, or whatever the story is around it, right? Or even maybe we just like complaining, and this gets back to the thing of maybe that's been our strategy through life: complain, fight, argue, cause a problem, stew on it, repeat, 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 which keeps me right where I am. But if you're watching this and you're into evolutionary astrology, you don't want to be where you are. Meaning, yes, you want to be where you are in your moment, but you don't want to keep recreating everything you've been recreating. You want to be consciously evolving. And Mars is like your greatest ally in doing that, because it is literally the energy that fuels the effort. It's the drive, it's the honor in going for it, it's the courage to make it happen. But it comes at a cost. To break out of the circle, to leave the womb, to leave mom, to break away and do my own thing requires a sacrifice. And some of that is letting go of some old patterns so you can establish your own patterns, your new patterns. And that's, in my mind, maybe the best gift of Mars. It's the part of us that says, hell yeah, I'm going to go do my own thing. And in doing my own thing is going to be good for everybody. Okay. Thanks, everybody. So happy to have you here. I hope that you'll tune in again, and wherever you are, so many blessings. Goodbye.